have is full a lot of times, so people are change. It's really my great pleasure to introduce Stanley to you.
Here, I'll give that in case it comes in.
Heart monitors, banking validation systems, oceanography, technology, and on parts of the Star Wars program. And he holds a lot of patents on water fuel cell technology. He's listed as who's who of American inventors and is well published and well known. Please let's give a round of applause for Stanley.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming this morning. If I'm not an early riser, so if I'm not activated, you can kind of kick me a little bit, and we'll go on. Communication is really the name of the game in trying to develop new technology and get it commercialized. We do release a publication we call The Birth of New Technology, and on the TSRs that you've received, it's an overview, a brief overview of the tech base. This is about a 230-page detailed step-by-step explanation on why and how we actually can use water as fuel. We have other publications on the back of the manual. If you desire to have this manual, all you need to do is send us a letter of request, including in it a check drawn on a U.S. bank, and then we will in turn immediately send back the data and literature to you. I have a very short period of time. It's hard for me to condense 4 hours presentation down to less than an hour, so bear with me. I'll hit you very high in high technology. After the session, you have some questions. Feel free to ask once we get into the presentation of it. Can you turn on the slides? Slide projector. In the historical events in inventing and developing, back during the Arab embargo, I did an analysis as to why we had an energy problem. And it alarmed me that a little country over in the Mideast could actually cripple the United States, because the industrial base of the United States and the world is based on what? The supply and utilization of energy. My background is quite diversified, from high-tech research and development, product development engineering, corporate entrepreneuring. I'm an independent businessman, and I had always kept in high-tech development, and basically developed many products on my own. When the Arab embargo actually hit the United States, I had a very lucrative business in retailing the truck parts, making enormous sums of money, but when the trucks stopped along the road and the goods and services were no longer moving out of the Columbus, Ohio area, I started asking the question, how long do we have before the food supply chain in the United States would be disrupted? They said, Stan, if you don't get your trucks up and running within 27 days, you will disrupt that food supply chain. And in the world, it's less than that. When I did the analysis as to why we had an energy problem and looked into what technology was available, it became quite apparent to us that we had to solve the energy problem. And in my high-tech background, I realized most generally the problem is not solved by the multi-international or the government. It's generally solved by an individual or a group of people who see need and come together and solve a problem. So I went in my office laboratory and I just simply asked a prayer to God. I said, God, I love my country. It's the greatest country in the world. I have been all over the world. If you will help me put a power supply in the country, I'll do anything you want to do. And subsequently, I was filled with the Holy Spirit. I exercised all the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and this is how I've been bringing the technology in. The mountain was so high because at that time, being involved in high technology, I realized the various and the many different ways of how to control and suppress high technology. I have been there. I have observed it. So the only thing I had the intellect to accomplish it. I had the motivation to get it accomplished. The one thing I did not have was the faith to be able to overcome the obstacles that would be put before you to try to bring in an alternate fuel source. And of course, in the conference, I always hear all of the horror stories about people who have tried to bring in alternate fuel sources, and many of those stories are true. So I needed to release my faith under the Lord. The first objective was to be able to, that I knew from my prior experience, legalize the technology first and then bring the technology out. There are many loopholes in the national and international patent laws, And so it's required that you would understand these loopholes and try to prevent a technological blockage from occurring. Now back then, it became quite obvious it was not going to take one patent, miracle patent, to solve the energy problem. It would take many patents integrated together to come up with full systems development. Many problems that confront the inventor, that they make a classical mistake in developing their ideas, is they do not develop the technology to maturity. We always talk about the environmental problems, and we are leading into a world global crisis in many different areas simultaneously. In the case for the privilege to run an internal combustion engine off of fossil fuel for the last 70 years or so, all those nice little chemical oxides going out of the exhaust when that car or engine or diesel engine is running off of fossil fuels. Those chemical oxides are actually electrovalently linking up to the ionosphere. It's shutting off the light, sunlight coming into our atmosphere. Several years ago, I was taken to a very beautiful part of the tundra of the Scandinavian countries. In Sweden, I had recently gone back and all the trees were dying. And they asked me, Stan, why are our trees dying? The very trees that we need in order to convert the CO2 back to O2 to have the O2 for breathing. And I said, well, the chemical oxides that are electrovalent linking up to the ionosphere is shutting off the sunlight by as much as 10% in certain global regions, is allowing the viral germ of blight to be formed, which is now killing off our trees that we need to order to sustain and maintain life on Earth. In conclusion, we always talk about the greenhouse effect, that the chemical oxides are heating our air. We're having tremendous climatic conditions. It's continually getting worse. The polar caps are melting at a rate now to cause the surface of the oceans to rise 1.5 inches per year. If you have any land down in Florida, I suggest that you try to go to higher ground in the next couple of decades. I believe the highest elevation in Florida is 50 feet. So it won't take you very long to calculate how long Florida will be underwater. In conjunction to this, of course, the polar caps are melting. It's causing an imbalance, and the Earth is starting to wobble even at a faster rate than it has done in the past. But in conjunction with all of this, the core samples from the polar regions have shown that prior to the Industrial Revolution, the oxygen content in the air was around 30%. For the privilege to drive an internal combustion engine off of fossil fuels, that 30% has been dropped to less than 20%. You see the O2 going in through the engine and linking up to the chemical oxides is coming out to a poison. It is very illogical for us to say we're very intelligent, yet it's illogical that we have allowed a few men to control our economies in such a way that we're killing the Earth ecological life support system. It is illogical to pollute the air, the land, the water, and sea and expect that we're going to live for a period of time to tell about it. We're almost at a crossroad where we may not be able even to reverse the damage that is being occurred on this spaceship called Earth. In conjunction to this, in running an internal combustion engine, the O2 content is dropping to less than 20%. Population will go from about 5.6 to around 9 billion in the next 12 to 15 years. And China's opened the doors to Western technology, and it's estimated it'll be roughly about 1.3 to about 1.5 billion cars running around. And when you're driving your car, you're processing hundreds of thousands of millions of cubic feet through that engine, and you're causing the greenhouse effect. Now, we must be able to reverse the ecological damage that's being done to Earth, at the same time be able to maintain the industrial base of the world. Many of you probably are not aware of that during the Gulf Arab War, the UN really got the United States to use a form of nuclear weapons, low energy grade tank projectors that would penetrate the surface of the tank. If you would look at this photograph, you would see the tanks were blown apart like paper mache. If you look at the corpse were carbonized from inside out. Under the Freedom of Information Act, it was absolutely confirmed that we released well over 100 tons of one of the most highly radioactive materials over there. It has also been confirmed that Saddam Hussein kept his promise and used chemical biological agents over there. And of course, the so-called Gulf War syndrome has all of the effects of the radiation and the chemical biological agents. A lot of the oil over there is contaminated. I had very high-level meetings with representatives from the Arab nations that have confirmed this. 5 nations have confirmed that this oil is contaminated. If this contaminated oil would be allowed to come in our country or any country in the world, then the internal combustion engine would become the greatest war weapon that you could have ever imagined. If that contaminated and radioactive oil comes into a country, you can imagine stopping behind a car when at a traffic light in the summertime when the window's down and breathe this contaminated oil. I will assure you, in all probability, you'll develop lung cancer. And the internal combustion engine, under this condition, you could probably knock off about 220 million Americans and do it in less than 2 years or so, and knock off about 360 million Europeans. Whether the oil is cut off to us or not, by war or by contamination or by other means, the Arabs are not in love with America. They could just as easily turn around and sell the remaining oil to China, who wants now to industrialize and has the same goods and services that you and I have been enjoying over the last 200 years or so. The key to this, trying to solve the energy problem, was naturally to go to water. A lot of people don't realize that when you drive your car on gasoline or diesel fuel, you're actually running off of hydrogen. The gasoline roughly has about a half a pound of hydrogen into it by atomic weight. Water, on the other hand, has 2.5 times more hydrogen to it, and under National Bureau of Standards, it's 2.5 times more powerful than that of gasoline. So it became quite imperative that if we could use water as a fuel source, we would not only be able to solve the environmental pollution problems, but we could sustain the industrial base of not only the United States, but the world at large. Therefore, we would not go into a global economic chaos as oil is being dwindled. It has been confirmed that the OPEC oil fields are depressurizing, much like they had depressurized in the United States. But you can't keep pulling all the oil out at the large volume that they have. OPEC had informed the industrial leaders several years ago that they could not increase the demand of oil to supply for the increasing industrial base of the world. Their natural pressure is dropping 3 times faster than occurred in the United States, and you can calculate very quickly that, in fact, if those fields become depressurized at the rate, we probably have roughly about 8 years or 12 years of supply of oil coming out of the Mideast. After that, the dominoes effects will occur. Countries are now and would become destabilized, and in all probability, global war will occur over energy. Believe me, that is a very realistic view of what's confronting us. Knowing this, it became imperative that we must use a fuel source that's very free, abundant, and very readily available. It also turned out that water per pound of natural gas compared to water, it's about 1 pound to 1 pound. 1 pound of gas to 1 pound of water. The blessing to it is that the water provides its own oxygen for combustion, so therefore you eliminate the O2 being extracted out of the air. It became imperative to find a way to how to be able to pull apart the water molecule and do it in a physical manner, not chemical. And so you have to learn how to ask the right scientific questions. And what actually took place, that when the unlike atoms take on a covalent bonding, under the law of physics, that for a reaction there's an equal and opposite reaction. No one was asking the question, well, once the unlike atoms come together to form the water molecule, what actually takes place? And what actually occurred was that, in fact, that in the field of physics, in the outer orbit, the L orbit, that normally the oxygen atom by itself has 8 electrons and 8 protons. But when the unlike atoms of hydrogen is covalently linked up to the oxygen atom, then the L orbit now accepts up to 10 electrons, and as a result the oxygen atom swings to a negative electrical charge. Since the hydrogen atom is now sharing its negative charge electron, the positive charge of the hydrogen atom now swings positive. Therefore, the water molecule was bipolar electrically charged. Heretofore, they assumed in the field of science that all molecular structures were held together by the electromagnetic attraction force. Well, we had shown, in fact, that there is an electrical attraction force, Q and Q prime, that actually is formed between the unlike atoms. This electrical attraction force is now called, in the field of science, electrovalent bonding. You know, the scientific world likes to be able to put names to phenomena, and that electrical attraction force that holds the unlike atoms is equal to the 2 shared negative electrons that the oxygen atom has now accepted from the hydrogen atoms under law of physics that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So it became very apparent from this discovery that if we would expose the water molecule to opposite voltage potentials of electrical stress and shut off the flow of amps, opposite from that of an electrolysis process, we could simply now cause the water molecule to be pulled apart. And this was very well established by Coulomb's law and Newton's Newton's second law of electrical force, that whenever you expose an electrically charged particle to a voltage of opposite polarity, you will cause that electrical charged particle to go into a movement. So in other words, if I would create a positive voltage field, would not the negative charged electron be attracted to the positive voltage field? On the law of physics, that opposite charges will what? Attract. And if I set up a negative voltage charge on the opposite side, would I not now have a repelling action that like charges will repel? And so therefore, in an electronic circuit, you can set up electrical attraction force of opposite polarity, and we discovered we could simply pull apart the water molecule in a physical manner simply by causing the positive charged hydrogen atom to be attracted to the negative voltage plate, and at the same time the negative charged oxygen atom be attracted to the positive voltage field. Three things occur simultaneously of pulling apart the water molecule in a physical manner. Number one, you have the elongation of the water molecule. As the water molecule is elongated, then you have what is called changing the time share rate of the electrons, which causes a switch off of the electrons by the native intelligence of the hydrogen atom, says that I want to maintain as an atom. And then you have what is called covalent switch off. Well, Murphy's law come into existence. Can you check to see if I can move the slide? Anybody know about Murphy's law? Whatever go wrong will go wrong. So when Murphy shows up, then it becomes a blessing. Now, in this particular case, we are transferring the electrical stress from the molecular structure of water and applying electrical stress across the combustible gas atoms of the water molecule. And what actually happens is that since the nuclei is positive electrical charge, it would migrate now to the negative voltage field, and the negative charged electron is now being migrated to the positive voltage field, and therefore we are now starting to elongate the atoms of the water molecule. We're putting electrical stress on the combustible gas atoms. Therefore, we are slowing down the spin velocity of the electron, and under the electromagnetic theory of magnetism says that whenever an electrically charged particle passes through an electric static field, its byproduct is electromagnetic energy. So the strength of the electromagnetic field of the atom is directly related to the spin velocity of the electron. So when I put an opposite electrical charge and create this opposite electrical stress onto the atom, then I slow down the spin velocity, therefore the electromagnetic field strength of the atom becomes weakened. Now there are four forces that affects an atom. There is electrical force, electromagnetic force, weak and strong nuclear force, and gravity. What force affects all the others? Electrical force. So it became obvious that the electrical polarization process, and Lord had me develop the VIC circuit using the dielectric value of water as part of the electronic component of the circuit. I put two resonant coils on either side of the capacitor, which is formed by two voltage zones and the dielectric liquid of water, and therefore it became a tuned pulsing circuit. And when you adjust it into the dielectric value of water, you are now allowing the voltage across the two voltage zones to cause the electrical polarization to separate the water molecule in a strictly physical manner. You do not consume voltage in an electronic circuit. You're restricting the current flow. Therefore, you now have a very economic way of releasing the hydrogen and oxygen from water economically. And this is another illustration of the circuit. We are paralleling, and we're now bifilar wiring the resonant coils to give it an enhancement of amp restriction to allow the voltage to perform the work. We went through the system engineering. We found out that as you raised the voltage higher, then there were more gas was being generated, not on a linear effect as to the electrolysis process. We found out that the electrical polarization process occurs in all forms of natural water, even the most purest form of distilled water. Now, the technology of using water as fuel was actually invented and developed through the eyes of a businessman. Under the law of economics, the guy who comes with the cheapest way is going to win out. You know, there's a lot of Cadillac ideas that come in existence, but they don't comply to the law of economics, so they really never really get out the door. And it was also developed under the KISS method. Anybody know what the KISS method is? Keep it simple, stupid, don't make it complicated. Now, when I started back in the late 70s, I couldn't go to any textbooks to show these things, but the discoveries are quite simple. But once the realization of the mechanism was there, then it became quite obvious that water was a fantastic fuel source. Here's where we're increasing the voltage to higher to start to cause the water molecules to go into an ionization state, much like that of fluorescent tubes. Now we got into a very interesting part, is that when you tune into the dielectric value of water, you go into atomic resonance, which I will talk about, which now propagated release of energy to cause in a magnitude of increase of hydrogen gas production way over the prior state of the art of the electrolysis process. Next of the invention was learn how to adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen and oxygen gases. Normally when you combust hydrogen and oxygen, the burn rate is around 325 centimeters a second. But in order to adjust the burn rate to co-equal that of the fossil fuels, if I'm able to do this and accomplish it, then I would have a retrofit system that we can retrofit to every internal combustion engine in existence, and therefore maintain the economies of the world. This shows a hydrogen and oxygen flame that's being adjusted to around 37 centimeters a second. Most generally, if you remember in your high school chemistry days, when you light the gas, it would go poof. It's burning at 325 centimeters a second. Yet you're igniting the gas, and the flame is being sustained and maintained from ordinary natural water at a temperature well over 5,000 degrees plus. In order to do this, there's a characteristic of water that water is also like a sponge that will absorb ambient air. And the natural waters around the world will have anywhere from 9 to 11% of ambient air. The bulk of ambient air composed of non-combustible gases like nitrogen and argon and the other gases. And as a result, when you pull apart the water molecule from water, you're also releasing the ambient air with non-combustible gases. And so it's a multi-gas generator, and it automatically adjusts the burn rate down to around 47 centimeters a second. So we're now using the water as a gas mixing regulator. Now, if I'm using the water as a gas mixing regulator, does it cost me anything? Now, so far, under the law of economics, if I'm using ordinary rainwater, I don't process the water in any way. I don't add any chemicals into the water. Is it costing me anything? The political system has been trying to find ways of how to tax rainwater. And, of course, I'm not interested to get in that discussion with them. Second, the voltage zones are composed of stainless steel materials, which is chemically entered to the process. So under lab actual certification testing, the longevity is like 0.0001 per year. So if any of you people live for about 10,000 years, come back and tell me. But normally you would not have to replace the voltage zones. So I'm still complying with the law of economics, right? If I'm restricting current flow down to minimum and raising voltage higher, well then, is it costing me very much of electrical power in order to split the water molecule? Now this does not create energy. The only thing we're doing is developing the abilities to release the energy from water. Now we found the ability to adjust the hydrogen burn rate to any burning level from fossil fuels on down to burning leaves and paper. We developed now the ability for anti-spark back by using the mixture of the gas with non-combustible gases that somewhere along the line in that tube, which we call a quenching circuit, the non-combustible gas separates the hydrogen and oxygen gases, and as a result, if you terminate the gas generation, there's no spark ignition going back into the resonant cavity. And you have that spark arrestor irregardless of gas pressure or volume. This gives you an example of the burn rate. To understand it, if I put a hydrogen and ambient air into it and ignited one end, the rate of burn is roughly around 325 centimeters a second. If I put natural gas and ambient air in it, ignite the gas, it burns around 47 centimeters a second. So it became very obvious that if I now would mix the hydrogen and oxygen gas with non-combustible gases that do not support the burning process, then I can adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen gas to go equal that of the fossil fuels. That was the #1 major invention that allowed us now to go ahead and retrofit to any internal combustion engine or any device that's absolutely been running on fossil fuel. we now have a very economical way of doing this with using ordinary water. Now the byproduct of burning water, anybody know? Is water. And as a result of that, automatically in doing this, we're solving the environmental pollution problem. If you're running a car on water, as an example, you're no longer putting the chemical oxides in the air from the byproduct of burning the fossil fuels. That water mist being expelled out of the system is environmentally safe. We had to be able to adjust the burn rate lower than the 5,000 degrees as shows on the videotape. You have to get a little practical about this, because if you put that type of flame on the stove and your wife decides, I want to do some cooking, but you burn holes in her pots and pans, I'm afraid the cell job will be a little bit harder. So you have to be practical about it. So that learned us the abilities to adjust the burn rate. Now that gave us the abilities to develop the technology of running an internal combustion engine off of water. As an engineer, you look at the engine in three ways. Number one, it's a mechanical drive device. Got us here today? Secondly, is it not an air pump? It pumps the air through the engine and out the exhaust. Thirdly, is it not a manufacturer of non-combustible gases? And the answer is yes, because when the ambient air goes through the engine at the low temperature of combustion, it's not going in to the plasma state. And so the non-combustible gases of air has very little effect to the combustion process. It does not alter it in any way. Yet we take the non-combustible gases from air, electronically meter, mix it back into the fuel gases from the water, and therefore you can adjust the burn rate to co-equal the fossil fuels. Now, in the law of economics, how much does it cost me for air? Anybody can tell me it's still free, right? So I still got rain water that's free. I still have ambient air that's free. Here was another $1 billion patent was developed. The prior art said the only way you can transport hydrogen was cool it down to 465 degrees below zero, put it under pressure, and truck it down the road expending diesel fuel. And all we need to do is take ambient air, mix it, expose it to a flame, to create the non-combustible gases, mix it with the hydrogen, and we can adjust the hydrogen burn rate equal to or less than that of natural gas and transport it to any gas grid system anywhere in the economy without even changing a valve. Okay, we've gone through all of these wonderful things of how to split the water molecule, but the problem was, what good would it be to develop a system for home heating or develop a system to run an internal combustion engine if you can't keep the industrial doors open? Now, during the Arab embargo, I was called in with a meeting with the Columbia Gas System that informed us, the industrial leaders, that our natural gas was being cut off 100%. I saw some of the richest and most powerful industrial leaders in the state of Ohio popping pills, and I thought they were going to have a heart attack. Because basically what they told us was, without energy, we cannot produce a product. If we cannot produce a product, can we make profit? If you can't make profit, you don't pay your bills. And the bigger you are, the quicker you fall. And they tried to rally with all of their money and all of their efforts in intellect in the industry to try to come up with an answer to the energy problem. But I learned a long time ago in high-tech development, I don't care how many billions of dollars in research you have, you can't pay for creativity. Creativity comes from God, if it's a benefit for mankind. And I just simply asked a prayer to God, if you show me a way, I love my country, it's the greatest country in the world, I'll do anything you want me to do. So I embarked on developing the technology. But during the Arab embargo, we had roughly about 2.5 days of fuel for global defense. Today it's down to a day and a quarter. When it gets down to roughly a day's supply, the Joint Chiefs of Staff will have to make a decision. No more global defense. There are people called war brokers. There are men and women that are highly trained to bring countries into war, which is the largest and most profitable business in the world. Making and designing war equipment, go out and pay $1 billion for a tank, blow it up, go back next week and get another one, right? So there are people who decide to try to propagate their business and increase their profit ratios by this method. But the key was that I learned as a young man, you must negotiate from a point of great strength. We needed to protect the military and integrity of the United States. I was informed by the military of their problem. Even the Admiral of the Navy, in talking to them, told me that during the Arab embargo, that almost 60% of the entire nuclear fleet became inoperable. You see these nuclear modules in the subs, when you work them 7 days a week for a period of 6 months, they become radioactive and they become hot. So you have to pull out these modules and put new ones in. Now, of course, the diesel-fired submarines were no more operable because we had no fuel. The Arab embargo happened to be the greatest thing that ever happened in America because it woke up to that we had a great problem, that our entire military integrity and the economic base of the United States was in jeopardy. And Japan, of course, makes in their economy to convert raw materials into finished products, and they have to import oil, and so they experience one of the same things. So now we go down to the atomic destabilization of the water molecule. Einstein basically said if you knew how to get in to water, a gallon of water, if you could tap into this energy source, you could take a train and around a 1,000-car train around the Earth many, many times. There's an enormous amount of energy in a gallon of water, and if you look at the Equinox tape, you'll see where they talk about that one glass of water has enough energy that you could literally vaporize all the oceans of the world. We started to embark on this technology, and so therefore we now develop the electron extraction circuit that not only do we cause the electrical polarization process, and as we pluck the electrons off of the atoms of the water molecule, we pull the electrons out of the water, out of the resonant cavity, and therefore the byproduct is producing the electricity. So you can have self-sustained oscillation in the system. Now it became important that when we started plucking the electrons and we added laser energy, photon energy to it, we're now bringing the atoms to subcritical state, and once we bring it to subcritical state, we ignite the gases and an enormous amount of energy is released. It's called the hydrogen fracturing technology. Now to understand this, we were talking about in the conference about zero-point energy. Now basically the understanding of this is that in law of physics, the atoms reach stable state of equilibrium. The atoms in this podium here is at stable state of equilibrium. It only becomes activated if I take a match and light it and the wood starts to burn to release energy. But under the laws of physics, under stable state of equilibrium, the electron moves, and the spin velocity of the electron moves at a constant velocity. And it maintains at a constant spin velocity. But that is illogical because the electron, number one, has mass. It's 1/18, 40th the size of the nucleus. It exhibits an electrical charge. It exhibits an electromagnetic field, and it moves to an electric static field. And those force factors that are opposing the spinning of the orbital electron says that eventually that electron would simply slow down and attach itself to the outer walls of the nucleus. But it does not. And therefore, it becomes quite obvious that energy must come into the atom to stabilize and maintain the stable state of equilibrium of the atom. Energy must come in to the atom. Now let me kind of illustrate it in this way. The Lord says to me, we have eyes, but we do not see. We have ears, but we do not hear. What caused the formation of the energy of a hurricane or a tornado? And what causes lightning to be formed in a storm cloud? And what the Lord has shown me is this. Pose several questions. How is it that a fetus in a mother's womb can undergo atomic structuring to give us life? The mother doesn't take in enough food, nutrients, or enough solar energy to create one atomic structure. How is it that you can take a seed of a plant, put it in the ground, and grow a tree 90 foot high? That tree doesn't take in enough nutrients or photon energy from the sun to create one atomic structure. Yet the seed creates atoms, molecules, chemical processes that sustains life. Einstein said if we extend our hands in opposite directions, somewhere along the line our hands would meet. It means that our universe is circular in nature. The red effect in astronomy shows that in fact that our universe is expanding at a fantastic, alarming rate. How is mass being created in our universe? Einstein's equation of energy equals mass times the square of light showed that the potential of the light was greater than that of the third dimension. That energy is coming into our third dimension in order to create and sustain our lives as we know it. It became quite obvious then that if we would now take the atom and expose it to opposite electrical stress. Now, in the law of physics and science, we know that energy coming into our universe comes to the atomic structure. Now, we know if we hit the atom physically, you're going to release heat energy, right? Like a hammer hitting a nail. We know that Thomas Edison came along and oscillated the atom by way of current flow, and that was the invention of the light bulb. Gould came along and caused the atom to absorb photon energy and re-radiate it, and that was the invention of the laser device. The precursor to that was the maser, where we had learned that we can cause the atom to absorb electromagnetic energy and re-radiate it, and that was the development of telecommunications. You know, when you're at a soccer game or a football game, and all 80,000 plus people are screaming and hollering that the guy made a goal, and you hear this trumpet, and the guy goes like that in a trumpet, but it's amplified, and you can hear that noise of the trumpet clear across that soccer field when the screaming 80,000 fans screaming and very happy that this guy had made a goal. A trumpet in a sound box is actually an amplifier demonstrating that this energy can be tapped into, and we see it, and it's around us every day. Now, for an example, in a hurricane, when the temperature varies and the heat starts to rise, it starts the vortex. As it starts the vortex, it now draws in the water moisture into the vortexing air. The air, as it's now swirling, is causing electrical charges, both positive and negative, across the outer side of the vortexing air, and those electrical charges causes the water molecule to flex, and that's what fuels the hurricane and a tornado. The reason why you have lightning form at a rain front is because when the hot air and the cold air meets together and it starts to rise, the clouds start to vortexing, they take on opposite electrical charges. It draws the water moisture in between the clouds and flexes the water molecule under particle oscillation as an energy generator by way of electrical stress, and voila, you have lightning. It's all around us. Where is the energy coming through to create the lighting that fuels the hurricane? If you have the abilities to tap into this zero-point energy, the energy coming into our universe, we have an endless, free way of having energy that can bypass the reliability on fossil fuels. It became quite simple when you understand the mechanism that when you put the electrical stress across the atoms of the water molecule, and as you elongate the atom, you're now transferring the electrical stress to the component parts inside the nucleus of the atom. Now, in the meeting, it was quite evident in a lot of meetings that were here in the symposium that it always referred to, the requirement was to tap into nuclear energy. You must have high voltage potentials capabilities to do it. And what actually happens is that all these 100 and so particles inside the nucleus, like the meson particles down to the quarks and even the smaller particles, they are all arranged in a geometric configuration, and they are spinning on a vertical axis along with the spinning reference to the electrons. As you put electrical stress onto these spinning particles, if you remember the old steam engine where you had these spinning balls and it would regulate the engine, well, the mechanism, naturally, what happens when you split the water molecule, you flex the atom of the water molecule, and as you do it, it will release energy. Now, the way it occurs is that as the electrical stress is applied across these spinning particles inside the nucleus, they slow down. And the native intelligence says, I must have more energy in order to stabilize the atom at stable state of equilibrium, and therefore the energy aperture is open. Now, you have the quarks, and the quarks are held together by gluons, right? Now, what the hell are gluons? Well, they are energy pathways. That's right. Therefore, energy is coming into the atom, and it's passing through the energy spectrum, and it's now being emitted outside of the atom. And so the triggering mechanism is that if you put electrical stress onto that atom, you can cause that spin to slow down, and the native intelligence says that energy aperture will open, and more energy will go into that atom in order to try to stabilize stable state of equilibrium. Now, just as our eyes have the ability to see certain frequencies of energy, doesn't say that there are not other frequencies energies that are available. Now, we invented the infrared lens and the ultraviolet lenses to detect those frequencies of energy. Have we not? It does not say that there are not other energy sources that are available. Here's an example that Dr. Pappas has shown that the energy being emitted through the nucleus into the outer energy spectrum of the atom is a directional force, because the potential energy coming into our third dimension to create our universe as we know it, it has native intelligence to create our mass. It has the abilities to create and sustain our life form, and that energy potential is a one-way, so it's a one-way gate valve. Now we come to the point that as you expose the atoms of the water molecule under electrical stress, you are now starting to oscillate the atom under electrical stress. So unlike Gould and the others, we are now applying electrical stress of opposite polarity across the atoms of the water molecule to cause particle oscillation as an energy generator by way of electrical stress. So now we are causing the hydrogen and oxygen atom to increase in energy, that every time you will pulse it under enormous electrical stress, it adds more energy into the hydrogen and oxygen atom. Once you terminate the electrical stress pulse, it now shuts off the flow of energy into the atoms, and then that energy is now available to be utilized as work. So basically what's happening, the more you will oscillate the combustible gas atoms under electrical stress, more and more and more and more energy is going in to the combustible gas atoms. You now, anywhere along that line, can light the gas and release this enormous amount of energy that's available to us at a zero-point energy, and we now have a way to power our trains, planes, boats, and any other form of device that we have in our economy. We now take it, this is an example that not only we're energy priming it, we can now pluck the electrons to destabilize the mass, open up the energy aperture even further, and now release even more energy. Now, a classic example of this on a thermonuclear device, there's not enough energy in an atom to blow up anything. And you can prove this out very simple by taking an electron and pass it through a resistor, and you'll get X amount of heat. Proton is 1,840 times greater than that of electron, so if I would pass it through the resistor in the opposite polarity attraction force, you'll find out you get 1,840 times more heat out of it. Where is there enough energy in an atom to blow and destroy New York City? What actually happens in uranium-235 and 238s, you have the clustering of the protons, which allows the clustering now of the energy apertures. And then when you blow the atom apart by a neutron bombardment, it actually destroys and rips open this energy aperture in a very violent way. And this is the energy that it really is releasing into our environment under that hostile environment that will blow up the city. What we're actually doing is taking a very natural phenomena that occurs in thermal gas ignition, and we're simply enhancing its control and releasing it to the energy level that we so desire. Now we get to the hydrogen fracturing point of the technology. This is where we take the atoms of the water molecule, we take it in subcritical state, we pluck off their electrons, we add photon energy in it to take it to a very high stable state, and we are now duplicating the muon process that had been very successfully demonstrated in universities in this country, where they would take a muon and trick the hydrogen atom, accept the muon, eject its natural electron. The muon would decay in a millionth of a second. There was a readjustment within the nucleus of the atom and says, oh, I don't have an electron anymore, I must release energy. And so when it tries to stabilize, it flexes and releases this enormous amount of energy coming through our atom structure. Here is where we're taking and causing at least 4 to 5 electrons to come out of the oxygen atom. Normally when an atom has at least 50% of its electrons missing, it acts like a little baby and it blows apart. In this particular case, what we're doing is exposing the hydrogen atom to photon energy. It absorbs it, it causes their electrons to migrate farther away from the nucleus. Its electric attraction force becomes weakened, whereas the oxygen atom is 8 times bigger. And so when you take it on the gas ignition, you have, and as the unlike atoms try to come together to form the water molecule, it has an avalanche effect, mass density occurs, an enormous amount of energy is being released. The projected and energy yield release is anywhere and beyond, up to and beyond 2.5 million barrels of oil per gallon of water. Now we don't need to get to that size because we don't want to destroy the hydrogen and the oxygen process. Okay, we've done all this wonderful research in using water as fuel, but if you can't system engineer it, it doesn't mean anything, right? So you're finding out a lot of talks in the symposium. This has been confirmed now in many, many governmental and university laboratories around the world. This is where we're now taking the water molecule, meter mixing it, and exposing it between 2 high voltage zones of opposite polarity, shut off the current of flow around 40 kilovolts or higher, and we now instantly convert water into thermal explosive energy. Now, this device does not create energy. The only thing we're doing is utilizing the energy that's already there in the atom. It's a triggering process. It's like a thermonuclear process, but this one here is under a control state. As a result of that, we developed what we call a water fuel injector that simply replaces the spark plug or the injector port in your diesel engine or your spark plug in your gasoline engine, or we replace the nozzle injector in a jet engine and literally fly it off of water. Now, in the environmental issue, they always talk about that the fluid inside the air conditioner is causing the destruction of the ozone. That's not what's causing it. When a jet engine is flying in the stratosphere, you'll find out the O3 goes to the engine. It breaks down to O2 and covalently links up to the aviation fuel. It creates the chemical oxides going out that's reducing the sunlight, and we're destroying our ozone. And I will tell you, if we allow this to continue on, you're going to create enormous holes in the ozone, and it's very well possible that our atmosphere will leak into outer space, because the ozone is the only thing that's really covalently or electrovalently linking up to keep our atmosphere in. If it does occur, I will tell you that it's possible that we can become another Mars, totally absence of any form of an atmosphere. Here's where we're now taking the resonant cavity. We're tuning the dielectric value of water, and this acts as a amplifier that we allow the electrical stress to be amplified and compressed, and this allows us to oscillate the water molecule atom farther and farther and farther and farther away from stable state of equilibrium, and then allow this outstretched atoms of the water molecule to be ejected out of the injector, and when they come back, it flexes as an energy generator, releases the spark that ignites the gas, and that's why we now can go ahead and replace the spark plug. The VIC circuit now gives us the ability to do that. The resonant cavities that can do this can take on different shapes. The tapered cavity acts as a compressional wave. The lower one actually has high heat generation, and therefore we can vector the heat and thermal exposure energy of hydrogen to any level that we so desire, from 0 to 90 degrees. Heretofore, that was not invented in the prior art. Now it became quite a simple system, is where we're now taking the water meter, mixing it into what we call a water fuel cell injector that replaces the spark plug. We meter mix the water, hit it with very high voltage, we put the electrical stress across it, and that energy now is released to run the car. There's an example of the water fuel injectors down in the bottom. There you see it replacing the spark plug on a dune buggy. We're using the latest technology in EEPROM technology and reducing it down to give us our cost effectiveness. The system is now in system upgrade for manufacturing. We're now using what we call a gas processor to take the ambient air, amplify it, and so therefore we're now using the internal combustion engine not to destroy the air, but we're using the process to use the internal combustion engine to now repurify the air and bring it back up to the level that it was prior to the Industrial Revolution. They always ask me about what happens if water freezes in the wintertime. Well, the Lord had me develop a resonant steam resonant technology, whereby which, since the water molecule is bipolar electrically charged, we now put a pulse electrical charge across the atoms of the water molecule. We stretch it, and then we release it, and we're stretching it like a rubber band and release it. It releases energy that heats the water. So therefore, we have a very economical way now to heat your home or heat the water to prevent the water from freezing in the wintertime. This technology has allowed us now to use water to generate electrical power. Now, we had to design the system and full system development in order to get it in compliance. The technology is legalized under the U.S. National Security Energy Act of 1992, which says any alternate fuel source retrofitted to an internal combustion engine must be oxygenated. We use the oxygen from the water. We're the only technology in the world that has that capabilities now. We got the UN to announce very recently to the world, stop running all internal combustion engine off of fossil fuels and do it absolutely immediately, because the acceleration of the greenhouse effect that's now taking place. Now, all of these nice, beautiful chemical oxides that's been put in the air by the burning of fossil fuels, we now, as we're running the engine on water, and the byproduct is water mist, those chemical oxides going through the engine can go through what we call an air reclaimer, and since those gas molecular structures are held together by an electrical attraction force, we now can simply pull them apart and take it right back to the natural state and release and to reverse the process that's been ongoing. Now the water can be slightly de-energized. Fortunately for us, if you allow, if there is a slight de-energizing the water molecule, the question was under EPA, are we swapping one environmental catastrophe for another? Are we going to have a lot of flat water around? The answer is no, because once you allow the water mist to be exposed to the sun, it will absorb photon energy and bring it up to its original energy level. So basically, the technology is a solar device. Now, since we're only using photon energy from the sun, are we taking anything out of the environment? No. All we're doing is taking the solar energy that's coming in from the sun and maintain the power, the industrial base of the world. In a way, we can use the universal energy or zero-point energy to amplify it. Now, NASA is looking at this technology for deep space exploration, because basically what happens to the water molecule, you can take the water molecule in electrical stress, release its gases, hydrogen and oxygen, ignite the gases to create thermal explosive energy, reignite the water molecule, cool it down, use the space of the heat sink, bring it right back through in a recycling system, and keep flexing the water molecule to keep tapping into this energy source. And therefore we have a fantastic economic energy source for deep space exploration, as well as now have a fuel source capable for space station operations. We are in industrial contracting right now. We've opened the doors to industry. We've legalized the technology under 35 U.S. Code 101. If there's any question of operability under that code in the U.S. Patent Office, come on in, gentlemen, we want to see it. If you demonstrate it successfully, you get your patents. And I've always recommended all the inventors, please do not try to get a patent on an over-unity device at this stage of the game. However, the German Vacuum Field Association under Dr. Nieper has confirmed, tested over unity of this technology. The Russians and the Ukrainians have confirmed. There's people in Japan has confirmed, and others have confirmed over unity of this technology. And so we now have it confirmed by the scientific community. Now I believe it will go political. We can demonstrate the technology, we can say it's here, but in actuality it will not be Stan Meyer to bring it in. It will be either you or I, the guy down the street, that will come together to bring it in. Otherwise, I do not believe that an alternate energy source, whether water fuel cell or other, would ever come in. It's going to have to be mandated by the people to try to reverse the environmental problem, the environmental damage that's actually occurring. But we are in industrial contracting. The technology led us to the development of the AZER technology, where we take the hydrogen atom, put it in a vacuum similar to that of a laser. We now cause and oscillate the hydrogen atom under enormous electrical stress of potential and oscillate it, and potentially the AZER is the most, potentially the most powerful laser weapon that will ever be developed by man at this particular stage. But we use it in reference to heating, or being able to use it as an element to cut metal or what have you. The internal combustion engine or jet engine could care less whether it's run on aviation fuel or water. Electronically, we adjust the burn rate to co-equal that at the temperatures inside the combustion chamber of the jet engine, and we can literally run a jet engine and do it off of water. It's only a matter, the technology allows us now to scale it to any size to release the energy. And the technology lends itself to your rocket engines. Any questions? Yes. Thank you. Question?
If you start with a gallon of water, and as you were saying with NASA rocket engine in space,
Right.
how much more do you end up with at the end over, say you burn a gallon of water, what do you end up with?
In all of our tests is exactly the same. All you're doing is putting electrical stress across the combustible gas atoms. You're oscillating it, okay? You're taking it to a very high potential of oscillation. You're releasing its energy, but you are not destroying the atomic structure. Therefore, you have no loss.
So essentially what you're saying is this could be a closed loop system where you feed the water back in and you recycle it. You use the sun and photon rebalance it.
That's correct. In other words, instead of allowing the water mist just to go out the exhaust, you could take a clear plastic tube or a glass tube and take the exhaust, expose it to the sun, because the absorption is quite instant, and take it back and run it through and use a closed loop system. Yes?
When will you have production heating for car retrofit?
Well, we're in about 5 different major projects right now. One is what we call a heat resonator for Europe. That's 90% completed. And what we're doing is what's called a proof of concept, that we come up with the engineering standard to determine that we have reached the operational parameters or specs of the unit, and then we convert it into mass production. The retrofit kit for the water fuel injectors for transportation, that's about 90-95% completed in its manufacturing standard. And so it would be roughly about a year and a half to 2 years, bar that there is no form of opposition. Now, when I started on the technology, I didn't have one white hair in my head. Okay? Now, I'm writing a book about it. Its title is With the Lord His Purpose, to talk about my faith walk. I'm really on volume 38, and I'll probably be on volume 52 before it's completed, that we can get it out the door. Yes?
Stan, I am Gene Meller. I mentioned a number of years ago.
Yes, I do remember you.
Very impressed with the demonstration you showed me the plexiglass cell. And I just want to say this. We were not able to measure the input power. Now I am the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Infinite Energy, which you probably see. I'll be delighted to have my own laboratory and my associates' connections with many small companies, large companies, Air Force scientists, you name it. We can get your technology certified. We'll put it on the cover of the magazine. We'll write up everything. If you'll just do one thing, just let us test it. Will you allow us to test it? We'll prove to the world, I guarantee you, that if you have a device that has energy in your gas that is greater than the electric energy you're put in, everyone who reads our magazine in 36 countries, very top scientists, very big companies, will absolutely accept it.
Okay, I'll answer it in this way. There are many loopholes in both the U.S. patent law and the international patent laws. And under the international patent laws, that if you release any of your work out in the public domain, you can receive a statutory blockage in receiving your patents. Now, it's one thing to get patents on processes that we're talking about. Now, when you get patents on processes and you reduce it down to practice, then it's the way and how that you reduce your technology down to practice. And many times inventors and entrepreneurs violate their design development rights on the system. So in this particular case, many governmental and university laboratories have confirmed the viability of the water fuel cell technology. So it has been confirmed in many different testing. Now,
where are the numbers? That's what I want to see. I want to see a professor or an engineer with numbers of, we don't need to get inside the box. All we need is, this is the input power tested by meter X. This is the
yeah, I understand.
EW research, right here, this man, David Wallman, very open, worked with us, published his data. He has a process that looks like it's every unit.
Yeah, what?
No problem. He's got patent coverage.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm not willing to violate my development rights to reduce it down to practice. Now, I'll give you one more second on it. In your reducing down to practice, you must assure that you have the design development rights. In this particular case, it was very important that we would maintain all full systems development rights to get the technology into the marketplace. So in our scientific world is doing a great deal of testing as to the viability of the technology, allow them to proceed on to make their determination as to converting the water into thermal explosive energy under the conditions that we do. Now, we have a policy in our development that we do not release any system. As we release it out into the public domain, then you can do all the testing you so desire. The industrial contracting we have, we respect their confidentiality as they have come into the projects to protect their investments in order to take this technology and translate it into a finished product. Yes?
Have you done the model or models for the conversion, let's say there are 150 million automobiles in the United States, of the water cycle? Let's say they were all running on water tomorrow. That amount of water vapor in the air, have you done any modeling as to how that might alter the weather patterns or how we might see these huge clouds coming up because of the change in the amount of water vapor?
Well, so far the model testing that we have shows that you'll get a more even distribution of the water mist around the world. It will not collect in one particular area. On a cool day, as the superheated steam comes out of the exhaust, it would just simply cool down in the the roadway would be just a little bit of moisture. But they look at it today as quite a stabilizing element for distribution of moisture all over the world. Any other question?
The questions in the hall.
Crossman, go ahead.
How soon will you have something that we can all see?
Well, some of our industrial projects as much as 90% completed. So it takes how long, the question is how fast industry will convert to finished product. Right now, industry, with their funding, they're moving extremely fast. They're moving faster than I even anticipated. So we're looking that we should have some units out the doors on the principle within the year, within a year and a half, possibly 2 years, if all goes well and no one interferes. Thank you very much.